Okay.
So Gigi, I just talked to Paul again. He has no access right now to join in. He is frustrated beyond belief, as you
Okay.
can imagine. But yes, he is without access to join the meeting. So he apologizes profusely.
What about, is there any other equipment in his, is he in a house?
Running into something.
Good morning.
All right. Good. That's
Well-
fabulous.
Well, Gigi, do you want to should we get this going?
Please,
Yeah.
Brian and
Um,
Gus and Bob, go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I was going to say, Gus, I think we have an intimate enough crowd where maybe people can just
Yeah,
introduce themselves. I'll just start with myself. Of course, I was just talking to Gigi Godwin, our president and CEO at the Montgomery County Chamber, and I'm Brian Levine, vice president of government affairs at the Montgomery Chamber.
Great.
How about you, Mel?
I'm Mel Toll with Lee Development Group in Silver Spring.
Molly?
I am Molly Metzner with Clark Construction.
I see you next, Feezy. Can't hear Feezy, but it's Feezy Halim from Montgomery College. I don't know if your mute's on, Feezy. Montgomery College, Feezy Halim. How about you, Steerhoff?
John Steerhoff with Venable.
Thank you, Mr. Steerhoff. Jay Grauberger?
Jay Grauberger, Executive Vice President, Corporate Affairs with Clark Construction Group. Good morning.
Murley, you're next on my screen. Why don't you go next?
Good morning, Murley Kalavapudi, consultant, small business owner, Montgomery County.
And we have 3 board members next. Mickey, why don't you go next?
Hi, good morning. Mickey Papillon with Federal Realty.
Jody?
Jody Staub, Gilbane Building Company.
Thank you, Jody. And Tammy, you're last on my list here on my screen. Can you hear us, Tammy? It's Tammy Watkins from Pepco. And of course, Charlie Scott, who has been integral to getting this meeting together. Charlie has not introduced himself. Of course, Charlie from WMATA. I'll hand it back to our co-chairs, Bob and Gus.
Bob, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure.
And I'll take it.
Sure. Hi, good morning, everyone. Bob Elliott with Lantian, co-chair for the ILU committee. Paul, thank you for joining us today. We're really pleased to have you. For everybody, before I hand it over to Gus to introduce our guest speaker, reminder that please mute while we're on. At the very bottom of the screen, if you're not going to be able to stay and you'd like to ask a question, or if you'd like to have Paul and Charlie kind of coordinate answering a question, please type it in the chat function. We'd also like to try to use the hand raising, if at all possible, that's under reactions. So if you could try to do that so we can help coordinate discussion later on, that would be great. And with that, I'll hand it over to Gus. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Bob. This is Gus Bowman at Beveridge and Diamond, chairing the Infrastructure Land Use Committee. And we're very pleased that Paul Wiedefeld is able to join us this morning. As everyone on the call knows, Paul is the general manager of WMATA, of Metro, and has been for the past 6.5 years. And this is a bittersweet moment for, at least for me, certainly for most of us, with Paul announcing his retirement. He'll be leaving during the summer as he works with the board of directors at Metro to find a successor. I've known Paul for many years. Before he joined Metro, Paul was the CEO of BWI Airport. And before that, Paul was the CEO of the Maryland Transit Administration. And before those days, Paul was at Parsons Brinkerhoff. So I have worked with the last 4 or 5 general managers in all kinds of capacities. And I can say for the record that we have not had a general manager of the quality of Paul Wiedefeld. So it's as I said, it's a bittersweet moment that this is the last time we'll be having a conversation with Paul before his retirement. So with that, I want to thank Paul for really taking the time this morning, given everything that's going on in his world, to speak with the group. And as always with this committee, we meet until no later than 10 o'clock. And I know Paul, assisted by Charlie Scott of WMATA, who's been a long-term member of this committee, will be happy to answer any questions the group may have. So with that, Gigi, did you want to say anything before we throw this to Paul?
Just to say that I am, it's been a joy and really an honor to work with you, Paul, over these years on Metro funding and on so many other issues. And I'm going to miss you. I've enjoyed working with you professionally and really admire all the great work. And I've said to Gus and Bob and other leaders at the chamber that we're fortunate to have your leadership over these very challenging years, that you deserve a Purple Heart for the great work you did. Thank you, Gus, for giving me a chance to say that.
Paul?
Yes,
All you.
Thank you so much. And I wish we were together. I really do. You know, I hate these things. As you can see, I had to kick the computer a few times this morning to wake it up. But anyway, Gigi, thank you for all the support you've given to the agency, really, and to the transit in the region. And Bob, thank you for your leadership in this work. But Gus, again, you know, as you mentioned, we worked together for a number of years through all kinds of things. From, if you recall, in our days dealing with the ICC, right? When
Right.
we did an effort sort of to get that built. In effect,
Right.
several years ago when I was with PB. So it does go back a long way. And so I appreciate all the support you've given me, both professionally and personally. So thank you so much for that. Yeah, it is bittersweet. It's bittersweet for me as well. Just to clarify a little thing, though, I am retiring from Metro. I mean, I'll see what the future brings. You never know. I'm not closing any doors. I've got a lot of things actually that I'm thinking of doing, and some of them may have nothing to do with the transportation sort of background. So maybe you will see me in other things as I move forward in my career and my personal growth. So what I want to do today is, and Charlie, I think, has a little PowerPoint. I thought I'd give you a little sense of how we're dealing with the pandemic, talk a little bit about our operating budget, our capital budget, just so you have a feel for what's going on out there. And then I really wanted to talk about the future and some of the challenges that we're facing and really have a discussion with you, if that's okay with you.
Fabulous.
Okay. All right. So if I could, Charlie, if you next slide, please. So yeah, I did, again, as I just mentioned, these are the 4 things I do want to cover. If I could start off with the pandemic and its impact on Metro. Just to give you a little bit of context, we started literally January 2 years ago. We had a pandemic plan in place that we had worked through the years, to be frank, in case there was an incident, similar to things we have with all types of, whether it's cybersecurity, terrorism. We have a number of cane books that we're gonna apply, and this is one that we did, and I think it worked fairly well. Basically, we've gotten to the point now that 93% of our workforce is vaccinated. 97% of the people are basically abiding by the rules, which means if you're not vaccinated, you must be tested, and or have a religious exemption. And then there's roughly about 3% that are not playing by the rules. And in effect, what we do there is you get 30 days to basically suspend you for 30 days, and you can jump back in anytime you want by getting vaccinated. If not, we move to termination. So that's good. We've been driving that number down, but there are a few people that still have not quite followed along, but we are moving to do that. But the sad news is we've lost, unfortunately, just yesterday, we lost another member of our workforce. We've lost 8 people during the COVID, the last 2 years. So it is, our people are, to be frank, they're scared. I mean, because a lot of our workforce has been out there for the last 2 years, dealing with all types of issues. I'm very proud of what they've done. I know we take a lot of hits, some of our people do, but the reality is over the last 2 years, our people got up every day and went out there where a lot of people were in situations like us. So I'm very proud of what they've done. So we're ready to go. We've started to bring back service, and I'll talk about that in a minute. So I want to give you a sense of the impact that the pandemic has had on us. On the left-hand side of this chart is where we were in effect in terms of ridership. roughly about over 300 million passenger trips during the year. You see this significant drop off that we've had. And then basically starting to come back. We're currently in our fiscal year 22. We've seen a slight comeback. We're about 34% total where we were. And for our fiscal year 23, which for us starts July 1, we're projecting roughly 53% restoration of our ridership. So you can see what that means. I'm going to get into a little bit later the complexity, because it's not just ridership, but there's a financial element that drives our financial model that's very important for you to understand. But basically, you can see how the dramatic drop that we've had. This chart shows basically where we've been sort of rolling 13 months. So in the last, roughly last year. So you can see what we did is we started to come back, and in effect, we plateaued on the rail ride or on the bus ridership. We had plateaued about 60% of where we were pre-COVID. And on the rail side, we were roughly at 30%. We've had a drop, obviously, with Omicron, the 7K. We had to pull back bus service because we basically did not have the people to do it. We were almost had 1,500 of our employees were out during that 2-week period. So we just started the service up this Monday, basically back to full service on the bus. And we're still dealing with the 7K issue I'll talk about in a bit. But what's interesting is the impact of the 7K was not as great as Omicron. The next slide, please, Shelley. So let me move to the operating budget for fiscal year 23. This is out for public comment right now, but I just want to give you a sense of the environment that we're working under. Clearly, the pandemic still continues to impact the region, and it's impacting it not only from people dealing with the immediacy of it, but they're also changing their travel behavior, as we're all aware of. So we've assumed a 53% recovery, as I mentioned, which is a significant drop. The board has proposed, and we propose a number of enhancements to try to attract people back in terms of either improving service, the quality of the service, and or fare discounts to encourage them to come back. And in effect, what we're being, the way we're being sort of stood up right now is with the federal relief funding that has come through to us for the last almost 16 or 18 months now. This gives you a sense of it. So pre-pandemic, in effect, the 21 budget, we had obviously no federal relief. The subsidies came from the local governments. And in 21 and 22, in effect, we pulled back on the requests for the subsidies from the local governments. And that was because of the pressures they were all under. And we backfilled it with federal dollars in 21 at that roughly 700 million at the bottom row there. And then basically we're going to continue that continued in 22, and we're going to continue in 23. Unfortunately, it dries up in 24. So that's when this, and when I get into talking about the future, that's the big issue in front of us. The revenue side, obviously the passenger revenue fell off the table. You can see we're roughly almost 700 million pre-pandemic, and we're basically dropping to about 150 million right now. Same way with non-passenger service, non-passenger revenue, that's advertising primarily. And basically, as you can imagine, the advertising program has sort of not dried up, but simply took a hit without the eyes looking at the advertising. The advertisers were not going to advertise. So it just gives you a sense of where we are. Our expenses have basically remained, they dropped a bit. Some of our fuel costs and things like that went down. They do start to rebound this year. And in 23 budget, there's a bit of a jump. And that is primarily two factors. One is it's the opening of the Silver Line and opening of a new Potomac Yard metro station. So there'll be a cost associated with that. And then also in our labor agreements that basically with the rate of inflation, if it gets above a certain level, they immediately, a kicker kicks in where their salaries go up. So that is what's playing out in the 23 budget. We've done here, I mentioned a few of the things that we've done to try to attract riders. Some of the things that we're doing is just trying to recognize the different travel market. So for instance, the weekend rail flat $2 flat fare and the basically late night rail fare of $2, meaning from 10 on is $2. And again, that's because the travel market's shifting and we see to pick up in there, and we're trying to track people in that to come and use the system. Again, our strategy is to try to get people reintroduced almost to using transit, as they go forward. There's a number of things we're also trying to deal with, the high level of teleworking that people are going to be doing. So we've done a number of things in our passes, either discounted them or given the ability to use them for longer periods of time, since people will most likely not be coming in 5 or 4 days a week any longer. That may be stretched out over longer term. So basically that's what's trying to do here. And you can get a sense of the estimated ridership we think that we'll get from those initiatives. One of the things we've done, and Gigi's been active in this, we started fairly early with this, which is this Stakeholder Toolkit, where we work with the business community. And this is when, remember, as you all know, we've been through these, we're ready to go, and then things, shifted on us, meaning the entire community. So almost a year ago, we thought we were sort of starting to pull out of this thing, and we started a pretty aggressive effort to say we're ready to come back, the place is clean, and all the things we're doing on that level. And then obviously we've been through what we've been through recently, and that sort of took a nosedive. So we're sort of holding back right now. We're going to come out again in the spring, later spring, with a whole new effort to try to get people to use us as things start to reopen, hopefully, that we don't have another turn. So this is a mechanism that we've used, and people can use this in their own forums. We have a bunch of videos and different things that people can use to make people more comfortable in using the system. But we've got to rethink that all now, since again, the world keeps changing around us very quickly. And so you'll be seeing more of that. Gigi will be reaching out to the group that we had set up earlier to sort of reinvigorate that whole effort. But right now we did not want to do that because it would, we'd just be literally wasting dollars and everyone's effort, because we just don't think people are quite ready to come back to the system at the level we want them to come back to. So let me just hit on the capital program briefly. This chart just gives you a sense of where we've been in our capital budget, and it's kind of interesting. If you look at fiscal year 2015, which is the fourth set of bars over there, the blue bar represents how much we actually delivered, and the gray bars was the request we made to our board. As you can see, we were not performing very well. We were asking for more than we physically were delivering. We weren't leaving money on the table, but it just constantly kept rolling into the future. And it was a series of issues that we were dealing with back in those days. So we focused quite a bit on that, and you start to see that change in 16, and then through 17, 18, 19, and 20, in effect, we were delivering, in fiscal year 21, we delivered 64% of what we asked to deliver, what the monies we were asking for. In the 17 through 20, we were delivering roughly 99%. At the same time, our budget increased, the expenditure rate went from roughly 700 million to almost 2 billion. And that was the function of the dedicated revenue that we got, which again, I think, thank you for the efforts that you all did at the local level to support that. And so that's where we've delivered a lot of the projects that we knew we had to do, and we started to focus on it and got it done. 21, we slipped a little bit, and to be frank, that's because of the COVID and some of the supply issues, but also just the manpower issues as different firms went through different things, and our own people went through different things. So we're still above 90%, but it's a very aggressive capital program, over 2 billion, and in the future program is even larger. This gives you a sense of what we've focused on, and this was our message when we went for the dedicated revenue, which is that we had a very large backlog of state of good repair, just physically keeping the system just performing at its base level. And it's broken into facilities, some of the systems, particularly on the rail side, stations, as you see a lot of work there, track and structures, the physical parts of the system, and then vehicles, whether it be rail or bus. So you can see we had roughly a $7 billion backlog. We've whittled that down to almost, we will in the current program, to 3.2. We've almost cut it in half. We made great strides in every area except for the systems, and that's because of the nature of that type of work. It takes a lot of effort to get ready to do that, and then when you start to do that, it then spends very quickly, and that's why you see that dropping down by 31, because it literally takes that type of time to get that type of work done. But significant strides in this area. Here's just a quick video, give you a sense of some of the work that we have accomplished. So here's some of the things in 23 that are coming up. Again, it'll be our largest capital budget, the 2.3 billion budget. It's probably our largest since the construction of the system, which is fantastic. We will be completing phase 4 of the platform improvement project. I mean, you've experienced that in Montgomery County. We'll be hitting New Carrollton, for instance, this upcoming year. Major repairs on the Yellow Line Bridge and Tunnel. So that will be a significant one as we do that. So that is major work that needs to be done there. That again is pushing 50 years old. But on the bus side, Northern Bus Division, which is a major bus division that sort of towards Montgomery County, and Bladensburg, which is our biggest bus division. Just to give you a sense, the Northern Bus Garage is over 100 years old, and the Bladensburg is maybe 60 years old. To give you a sense of that scale, though, that's roughly $800 million worth of work. So this is not small money. These are big projects. And we're also moving towards basically making those facilities suitable for electric buses. So that is an added expense, but one that we feel is well deserving for the future. And then all this is supported by the dedicated funding that we've been getting and the infrastructure dollars that are starting to roll through at the federal level. So what do you get for all your money? Here's just a few metrics that we follow. As you recall, several years ago, literally, daily almost, you would hear reports of arcing insulators and different track issues and cable fires. As you can see, we've driven those down. They do occur in any system, but we've gotten that to a much more manageable point of view. And then on the right-hand side is a number of things that we measure to see if we're moving in the right direction. Again, this is pre-pandemic, basically, because all these numbers start to get funky, to be frank, with the service out there and the ridership numbers. But by and large, we were at a very good point going into the pandemic. Unfortunately, we've all taken a hit with that. So this, I think this is probably the most interesting part of that, and I look forward to the discussion, is really as we think about the future. And if I could, just on a personal note, as I started to review where I was in my career and the effort, the types of challenges that I see, I really felt that for me personally, I could not commit into the level of years, to be frank, I think this may take, and the energy it would take. It took us almost 3 years to basically get the dedicated revenues across the finish line. And that was with a topic that had been discussed literally for decades, almost from the moment that the system was open. There was this understanding that we didn't have this source of funding to support it. So in my mind, it's clearly going to take that level of effort of both understanding some of the issues facing us, and then building a strategy to deal with it, and then building the political will to do some of those things. That is a huge effort in my mind. And then on top of that, thinking of how quickly the technology and the travel markets all is changing around us. I really think it's time for someone else that would take that on and make that level of commitment to do that. So that's one of the reasonings for me to move on from a professional side, not on a personal side. So I think there's a number of things that I think we have to wrestle with as a region. And part of it is, as the pandemic played out, as you know, it was also at the same time Black Lives Matter and all the issues around equity in society were being addressed. And it really showed us how important, parts of the community are to making our daily lives work. But it's a part of the community that basically didn't have a lot of other options but to use us and go at risk to use the system. So we saw, that focus on transit-dependent riders, how important they were, the people that support the hospitals and our food network and everything else. But at the same time, the quality of service that we provide for them is nowhere near what we provide other people with other opportunities. So that is a very complex issue, societal issue that we have to wrestle with that plays out in our world. The second point is really probably the most important from a financial perspective, and that is the financial model that supports Metro is primarily based on peak period travel, a peak period fare, because we charge more at peak periods, and the long distance nature of the trip. the to work trip. Well, that supported the financial backbone of the system. That's how it's built. Roughly about 80% of our revenues from the fare box were come from the rail side and primarily from the peak period side. All right, so that is what we believe is no longer sustainable. I don't believe it's coming back to the degree where we were. So that is a big financial challenge. So to address that, I think we really need to think much broader than just the annual budgeting process, but really think of the underlying, systemic issues that are going on here so that we can start to say, now, what does this system start to look like? And then how do we support it? This pre-COVID access high quality is for this issue of particularly bus to rail. A lot of our bus service may run every 20, 30 minutes plus, for certain routes. Whereas the rail pre-COVID, was running every 6 to 8 minutes and serving totally different markets as we've seen during COVID. And it has put a focus, the virus has put a focus on the importance of these essential workers and the critical role they play in the society and for our transit system. So those are big, tough issues. So in my estimation, I think there needs to be a regional discussion of these are some of the bigger issues that are out there. How do we want to start to think about the system to support them? Is the current model the right model? Is the current financial structure the right structure to support this? What does that all start to look like? And so that is a big part of what needs to be thought of. And it's not only on the sort of operating, what do we operate, but we also need to understand the capital side. So those numbers I showed you are very strong in terms of the level of money. But the dedicated funding that we did receive does not grow. It's capped at $500 million per year. And so you can imagine both in terms of as costs increase over time, and now we'll be hit even harder now with supply chain issues, inflation. But also the nature of capital programming is what we did is we sold a lot of debt. So we could deliver these projects that are needed now when we had that $12 billion backlog. So how do you do that? You go at it. And the way you do that is you sell a lot of debt. And so basically you can deliver these projects, and that's how you can triple your capital program in that short period of time. But what that also means is there's not much, that money starts to dry up into the future, meaning you don't have the available dollars to keep attacking the problems because in effect, there's dollars to spend for. So that's another complex issue that needs to be, thought through of how do we deal with that? What level is that? At the same time, we have a huge capital investment in our bus and in our rail system that in the rail system it will be 50 plus years old, as we deal with some of these issues, and literally some of the technology that we have that runs the system can no longer even be supported. And we're talking multi-billion-dollar investments, even to bring that to a certain level. I think the other thing though, as we think through this is, we're not unique. This is almost a national issue, particularly for major rail systems across the country, the Chicagos, the Friscos, the New Yorks of the world, the Bostons. And I had a meeting with our delegation the other day, and they get it. They understand that, it's a problem that we're facing. It's a bigger problem. What does make ours a little bit more unique is we're one of the few systems that does charge for distance and peak fares. We're one of the few that actually do that. And the second is our reliance on the federal workforce in our financial model. Because pre-COVID, roughly 40% of our peak hour service was federal employees. And their current guidance is that basically they only need to come into the office 1 day per week. So you can imagine the impact that's going to have us going into the future if that is the new standard, which I believe will be. And that's, that is a little uniqueness to our region because we're so dependent upon the federal workforce, just given the nature of the region itself. So I think with that, I would love to open it up to any discussion, any questions, or really discussion that you might want to have.
Thanks, Paul.
Yeah,
it's great. So a reminder, everybody, if you would please, if you've got questions, type in the chat or please raise your hand. One question for you, I appreciate all the statistics about, where we're at in our recovery period. How does this compare to other markets, nationally? Does DC's look different compared to, New York or, and I'm thinking maybe comparing us more to the Northeast as opposed to a Sun
Sure.
Belt, cities that truly have a dedicated, Chicago. It's harder when it's light rail, I think, because of the size of the scale. We have a lot of stations, we cover a lot of ground. Maybe you could give us some insights on that, if how that's, what does that foretell for, your successor?
Sure. If I could, I'm going to even broaden a little bit further, because one of the things that we do, we're part of an international transit organization. So we're monitoring cities around the globe that are, like us. And what's interesting, whether it's in France or you name it, right? Particularly in the the free world, right? They basically are plateauing at around the 70% sort of where they were before COVID. In the US, we're probably a little bit further behind them. So our counterparts in Chicago and San Francisco and New York, again, New York, I put them a little bit to the side, but Boston, Philadelphia, they're just about where we are, maybe a little bit better. And I think that's that little caveat that we have with the federal workforce that maybe pushes us, makes it a little worse. What's also interesting is in some other areas, buses come up quicker and stayed stronger. Ours came up to about 60% and plateaued. So again, that may be, again, the nature of this region. So for instance, I know in Baltimore, their bus is up fairly high, but their rail is roughly 25%. For me, the canary in the coal mine for them is the MARC system, right? Because that's the same sort of market, a lot of the same people that would use our system, and they're about 25%. So it's kind of, so I think we're right in the same line. And then when I look into the future, where I look at some of these international cities that were there a little bit sooner than us, the US, they're not coming back at 100%, and so that's where they are. So again, that's why I think it's not an immediate, like, yes, we have a fiscal problem, we know we have a fiscal problem in fiscal year 24. Because the federal money dries up, we're estimating roughly about a $500 million hole in our revenues in fiscal year 24. But it's not, we just can't solve 24 because it's not a one-time deal, in my estimation. This is something that's going to be the new normal, and how do we adjust to that? And a 25% hit on our revenues is a very large number. That somehow we've got to adjust. How we think about the service, how we think about supporting the service financially.
Yeah, I don't see, Marley Scott, what measures are being taken to improve ridership going forward?
Well, I mentioned some of the things we've done in trying to understand the non-peak market, but the challenge that we have is we can increase ridership, but from a financial perspective, it doesn't maybe support the system. So for instance, if we're offering $2 flat fares on weekends, that's fine and good. But if we used to collect, $4 or $5 for that trip from Montgomery or Loudoun County, or soon to be Loudoun County, well, now that's $2. So whatever that ridership was, we may get a bump in ridership. Now that's got to pass how much we would have gotten had we kept that same structure. A lot of that was also the board's perspective and our perspective is that, there's some different markets out there that, again, we weren't serving very well. And this does allow to serve those markets. So that's probably the biggest thing. Obviously, getting the service back where we're providing high quality service is the other thing. But until we can provide we can provide the best service we can provide, but at the end of the day, if people aren't using us for other reasons, they're just not using us, right? I mean, that's what we're trying to understand and get a better handle on.
Follow on to that, have you considered new partnerships and intermodal transport model?
Explain if you could, not you, Bob, but I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, Morale, if you would jump in, please.
Just
sure. Good morning, sir. At Amtrak, they were looking at some of this intermodal transportation. Of course, their network is much larger, especially with SEPTA and Boston area, not avoiding delays. We have a smaller network, but have you considered anything on the intermodal bus to Uber or bus to Lyft kind of partnerships? Because convenience to get passengers across from point A to across the city to some remote region is the model we looked at when we were there, and that's in implementation now. So
Yeah,
just
oh, yeah, I apologize. Yeah, I do understand. Yes, and yes, definitely. So that last mile, sort of portion of the trip for sure. Yeah, we're definitely open to that. We have done some of that where we've basically done some things modeling or pilots on that. So one of the things that we have done, for instance, on our paratransit side, we've done that where basically we let Uber, Lyft do some of those trips, for instance. And the same thing, you're right, is that the nature of the trip may be that it's a little bit more, that last part of the trip can be done on that. My view, and this is a little counter to some of my peers, is I don't see Lyft or Uber as a threat. I just see it as the market saying this is what we want. So now it's our job now, how do we blend in with that? And so they do some things better than we do. So maybe that's a potential where we don't try to do some things they do, and vice versa. We do things that they can't do. So, they can't move 10,000 people, to the Capital One Center. They can't do that. We can, and we can do it very efficiently. And so those are things, but when at the other end of the trip, there may be things that they then support that. So I think there are definitely opportunities for us to do that. And we have talked to them. We've done some things with them to try to say, all right, we did, for instance, when we pulled back the late night service on the rail, we basically worked with the local restaurants and some of the hotels and stuff, said, okay, let's use this. You can use our mechanism that you paid already for and use their system, because it doesn't make sense for us to be running trains for 1,000 people. Do it this way. So those things, I think that's probably the start of doing things in the future. But as I really think into the future, as automation and technology changes, there can be so many more opportunities that we haven't even thought of yet, right? That are coming at us. That some of those trips may even be done by just vehicles, not even people at all. So I think we have to be very creative and open to all those alternatives, and not see it as a threat to the system, but see it as an opportunity to build the market.
I have a question. Ashley, I just want to jump in and ask. So I'm intrigued by the point that you make that it may be time to rethink the financial model and not base it on ridership. And which reminds me of conversations in the past about basing, transportation revenue on a gas tax as cars become more efficient and use less gas. So, I mean, models have to change as technology does. I think I appreciate that point. And I wonder who has changed the model. Are there models out there that why reinvent a wheel? Is there somebody out there that's doing it differently now where we should be looking for inspiration?
Yeah, I'm not sure, Gigi. I'm not sure there's a clear winner out there, but there are some people, some entities. I'm trying to think of the largest one. I'll think of it in a minute, but that offer basically free transit. They don't bother collecting fares, and their view is, and these tend to be the smaller systems, and we have it in the Dash system right here in our region. But they've decided that no, this is a core public service that yes, we're all going to pay for, but the analogy has been, when you send a child to school, they don't pay to go into the door, but yet society's paid for it because they see the value of it for all the reasons they see value of it. Now, obviously, we're a user product, so there's some logic to doing it, but that is probably the one area you do see it a little bit more internationally. You do see that. The one thing that what you also see internationally, particularly in the Eastern and Far Eastern markets or part of the world, is they kept the property. To be frank, when they built the systems, they generally own the property and then everything above it, and that is huge revenue. Like in the Singapores of the world. And so that's not our model here. It's a little bit of our model in the aviation world with my background there. That's how a lot of airports are funded. They basically build hotels, they build all kinds of things that drive their revenues. And where we do that, we do a little bit of that on the parking side. We do a little bit of that on the joint development side. But in the scheme of things, for the scale of this operation, if we could go back 70 years, 60 years ago, that would have been, a whole way to finance this system. It were, it's one of the mechanisms you could have done. we could have done, which is, look, this is a huge valuable asset, brings tremendous access. But our society is different, right? It's the free market, and the people own the land. But anyway, that's another. When you look around the globe, that is how a lot of these things are funded. And then the other portion is just having an operating source of funds that grows, which again we don't have either. We go annually and ask in budgets for operating costs. So that that's a good and bad thing, right? But I think it helps keep the pressure on to keep the costs down, but it also doesn't recognize that costs do go up, and that's going to always be the balancing act that we've got to hit.
Thanks, Paul. Jay, you've got your hand up if you'd like to ask a question.
Thank you, and I'll figure out my hand down now that I'm going to ask my question. First off, Paul, thank you for your time this morning and for coming and for your leadership through a very difficult time. Who could have ever imagined the last couple of years? So I just want to say thank you. I have a two-part question related to regaining or gaining new markets. And I guess the first one relates to the federal workforce. You said it was 40%. Are you getting any cause for optimism out of OPM or GSA about the long-term recovery or move of the federal workforce back to the office at some point? I guess would be my first question. And then the second one relating to Silver Line Phase 2. I've been pleased, a little bit of a retreat with Omicron, but the rebound in air travel, I think has been, amazing. And I'm just wondering if you're getting any read from MWA about air travel, if we think about capturing customers coming in to Dulles Airport or, what's, the kind of revamped DCA. Are you getting any cause for optimism of capturing that ridership once Silver Line Phase 2 opens? I know it's been in the operating budget. It wasn't on that slide of things coming up in 2022, but I'm assuming that with it's in the budget, it's implied that we've got that as a possible growth market for Metro. So I just wonder if you could speak to cause for optimism or pessimism on either or both of those.
Yeah, I think on the OPM, not necessarily positive. From my perspective, obviously, they're going to make their choice. They put out guidance about maybe 3 months ago that basically reinforced that they should be more open to teleworking. And they literally put in that the policy is such that the minimum is that someone would come in twice a pay period. So twice a pay period is every 2 weeks. So meaning twice, roughly once a week, right? So they've said that's a standard. It meets a lot of their needs. And as you can imagine, I don't know if you remember Nina Albert, she used to run my joint development side. Now she works for them. I have spoken to her, and they're rethinking their whole business model, right? They, all the federal buildings they have and their workspace, and they have to rethink all that because they're just not coming back to that. So I don't think that's a short-term thing. I think that is a long-term trend or a long-term reality that we got to deal with. In terms of the aviation, again, with my background, I have followed that a little bit closer. It's interesting. If you follow BWI, that's near and dear to my heart, they're actually going gangbusters, but it's not the business travel part of it. It is people just wanting to move around and do whatever they want to do, a family, whatever. But it isn't the conferences that's driving it. It's not that type of thing. So, and I know that I believe both at Reagan and Dulles, the Reagan part of it is fairly strong. Dulles is still fairly weak. Part of it's clearly because they're an international, their market is primarily international travel. So that's part of it. And that's not, because of the rules around the globe, part of it. But I also think, as we think, and you would know this more than me or a lot of your members, is the business community, what type of travel are they going to be doing, right? Are they going to be coming? Is the face-to-face, hand-to-hand sort of marketing and relationship as important as it was prior? And I'm of a generation where that to me is very important, but I can tell you, for instance, my son, he's been working for an asphalt company, the biggest asphalt company in Louisiana. He hasn't been to New Orleans in 4 years. And that's the way it is, right? And his generation, that's what's expected, right? It's not that they won't do it, but that's not how they want to do it. And I think most businesses are starting to react to that. And even over the last 6 months, and some of the business people I've spoken to, there was this sort of thinking, yeah, well, we'll be back, we'll do that. And I think even some people in that, they're starting to say, no, it's not going to be quite that way. And I've had to readjust my thinking. I've heard that from a number of business people, particularly people a little bit more my generation, who had a certain view of this, that, just maybe changing. So I think the opportunity is there, particularly Silver Line Phase 2. And yes, we're going to get that open before I leave. I'm going to the dragon if I either pull the train across myself, but no, we're going to get there. And I think there's tremendous opportunity there, but it also reflects, again, gets back to this larger picture, is how we think about the system. Because, initially that system, that line, and most of our lines were designed, we're an urban system and a commuter rail system in one, right? And a lot of our financial model is based on the commuter rail portion that we do, meaning the long haul trips, peak period trips. And then we do the urban shorter trips. But now, as you look at the development pattern, particularly like the Silver Line, and if you've been out in that area, there's a lot of short trips that can be made in that area that people are going to do. Some will come still into downtown, maybe for the work trip or for an event. But, I can envision where you're going to see a lot of very, 5-mile type trips in that area, right? That people could be doing just with all the development that's occurring along those stations. So that may cause us to rethink how we run the system. Are there some other ways we could run the system there? And it gets to the gentleman's point earlier, which is, all right, now you have this rail station in this community, but you have this stuff that's a little bit further away. And does it make sense for us to try to serve that with our buses, someone else's buses, Uber, Lyft, or some other model that serves that, to try to get people use that rail system for that shorter trip? But then their density is a little bit spread out versus like a downtown core. So those are again, I think, opportunities, but they really have to be maybe rethought of in a new context.
Thanks, Paul. Just a reminder, if you've got questions, please throw them into the chat or raise your hand. I'm happy to keep firing stuff away, so I'm going to do that for you, Paul. But so you touch a little bit on the development side of things in your stations, and a lot of the people on this call are obviously construction and development, real estate oriented. And I got to be honest, what you're suggesting is pretty grim for real estate, because if you're starting to suggest that we aren't going to return to the ridership and you aren't going to be able to have the sort of support or the interest in using that system, what does that foretell for, and I'm going to a couple different things here, the future of the office market generally, because obviously people aren't going to work, particularly in our region, the federal government. What does that foretell for transit-oriented development? Because, and obviously you all as a station provider and owner, you're still in the process of, trying to monetize some of these stations, either with development partners. You mentioned this idea that maybe there's a different revenue model that could be, but what's the importance of that? And I recognize you're taking this totally from a transportation oriented bent here, but, listening to all this, I have some serious questions and concerns about where do we go from here, right, other than maybe residential, right? Because the office environment is totally up for grabs in terms of where it goes. So some thoughts on that.
Yeah, but I think I wouldn't look at it in a monolithic way. So I don't think you can apply it across the whole region. So it may be different in the core of the district, which may be totally different than what's happening in Montgomery County or what you see happening in parts of Prince George's or Loudoun County. So I wouldn't be doom and gloom for those areas. I just think, but maybe the system has to adjust for the types of travel behavior around those markets, again, versus a model that generally was saying, all right, during these peak, rush hour periods, people are generating to this core and then coming back out. I just think there's going to be a lot more. We were seeing it, a lot more movement out here, and the development then supports that movement, right? Whether it be office, residential, retail, whatever it is. And that's, I think when you look around the region, you see that coming up. Whereas you see in the district, that seems to be a little cloudier for me, because, what does, again, a lot of their market is based on business people coming into the core, to eat, drink, smooth, doing everything they do, right? And that may not be as strong as it was in the past, but that doesn't mean it may not occur closer to a Dulles Airport, right? For instance. So I think it's not, I don't think it's all a doom and gloom. It's just, how do we adjust to a changing environment? I mean, it's like any business, right? The market changes and we have to change with it. and not just throw up our hands. We've just got to say, okay, it's moved in this direction. Now, how are we going to move to maximize it for us and make some hard decisions of where it doesn't make sense? And, pick a technology out there, pick, your old rotary phone. I mean, you had to move on, right? You got to move on to something else. It doesn't mean that, you're out of that business totally. It's that you're refining that business and then streamline it where you have to. And that's how, to me, that's how it goes. So I guess and I don't want to be that, the reason I'm bringing these issues is because I would not want us all just to focus, well, we only have this one little fiscal, literally I've heard it framed as the fiscal cliff. But to me, it's much deeper than that. And we've got to think of it that way to really address the bigger issue. And not just to figure a way to, put our thumb in the hole here and plug it up for another year. That's, to me, it's not, that's not the long-term solution.
No, I tend to agree. I think your point is this is much more systemic at this point. This is not just constantly, and great, certain things may be trending the right direction, but if the trends continue this direction, that's what I think, at least on the real estate side, I know we could certainly try to forecast that. Where is this going to take us?
Right.
Mel, did you have a question, Mel? I saw you came off mute. I just want to make sure if you had a question, you got a chance to ask it.
I keep trying to figure out how to say it. Because Paul, I have two worries. One is short term, because with the routes changing, cutback, service hours cutback, things like that, people, I think, may have lost a little confidence that they're really not, they begin to see the service as unreliable, and they're not going to build their life around a service that's unreliable. But then again, that's short term. That's the next 3 to 5 years. When you go a little farther out, I've heard about climate change, sea level rise. And as I remember, Metro has some service running underground down near, in low-lying areas, under the water. How do we deal with that 20, 30 years from now when, are we thinking about how to deal with that 20 or 30 years from now when the water level is 3 or 4 feet higher than it is now?
On your first issue, I don't think that's a 3 to 5 year issue. That the service level, we will be back to the quality of service, to pre-pandemic quality of service in a very short period. The bus system is actually better than it was pre-pandemic. We revised the bus service plan where basically we are guaranteeing certain routes, high frequency routes, 12-minute headways, where they were like 20-minute headways, for instance. So there's things there that we'll continue to do. So I'm not concerned about that. Same with the rail. This 7K issue that we're dealing with, we'll get beyond that. We'll figure out what's going on there. I wish it was a smoking gun. I could point to one thing and we just turn it on. It's not. It's much more complex than that. But we'll mitigate it and we'll move on. We'll get that and we'll be running that service. So I'm not worried about the quality of service as much as, again, these other forces that are coming upon us. In terms of your climate issue, yeah, we've done quite a bit of analysis of what that means, particularly in parts of the district. As you can imagine, some of the scenarios, you can pull them up on some of the environmental, the Maryland Department of Environment. They have maps that show what the world would look like in the future. So that is an issue for us that we will have to work through. Obviously, there's some things we can do physically, but the clear answer there is we've got to change this trajectory. Because this will just be one smarter, very, very big problem that we're all up against. But yeah, you're right. Physically, there will be parts of the system that will be under tremendous physical stress that we'll have to come up with some way to mitigate, into it. As you may or may not know, we pump millions upon millions of gallons of water every day out of our system. That's what we do. So that may have to be tens of millions for all I know, right, in the long-term future. But to me, that's not the solution. That's that's a symptom, and we're just putting a Band-Aid over the symptom. We got to figure out a way to solve that.
Any other questions tomorrow? So, Paul, we all know you're going to be departing the agency here in the not too distant future. Question: what do you think the greatest challenges for your successor is going to be? Additional, obviously, what we've talked about now, but obviously they're going to bring in someone new who's going to have a vision that's probably not inconsistent with yours, but also has to address the challenges of the future. Beyond just the patterns that are occurring within development and ridership and usage, what do you think are the other major items that people have to be thinking about and aware of as, they look forward, or the agency looks forward?
Do you mean like for the new person, the new GM?
Yeah, and look, I think we've been blessed to have somebody who's got a vision and has helped, correct some of the things that we're going forward. Somebody's gonna have to pick up your mantle and kind of lead from what you've shown, but then also possibly try to take it in a, if there is a new direction, what is that new direction? And what are those, what is that new person gonna have to do? And then what do you expect the challenges of that beyond just what you showed us? Is there something within the organization? Is there something that the agency needs to change to sort of help address that? Is that person going to need support from the government, the federal government? Give us some insights into your.
Sure. I mean, obviously, whoever comes in has to have the baseline, covered. I mean, they have to, deal with we have 13,000 employees. I think understanding some uniqueness of this job, meaning, that the 3 jurisdictions, meaning the District of Virginia and Maryland, the fact that we sit at the nation's capital and we have, the Hill and all the players there, that is a very unique part of this job. I think some of the other things to get the arm around is just sort of the labor management sort of dynamic, because that model, again, I think is rooted in a 40, 50-year-old model that's got to change. There's a gentleman that's running our largest labor union right now who gets it, a gentleman named Ray Jackson. We've had some tremendous discussions about, and so he'll carry this on with whoever comes in, about how he's got to rethink, even their approach. It just can't be the way it's always been done, because he understands the financial pressures that are coming. He understands the employment market, for the types of people we need, and then also the technology that's coming at us and the types of people we need to deal with that, and much less automation. So, I mean, those are big concepts that at the end of the day, we have to have labor working with us and us working with labor to attack some of those. So I think someone that has that perspective coming in and not sort of a strong labor management, sort of approach, I think is super important. Clearly, it's going to have to be someone that can both articulate and bring people along to get to some of these issues, because there's going to be some tremendous trade-offs. I think the bus system needs a hard look at, right? The rail system is going to have all these issues, but the reality is it's a sunk capital investment, right? And the business communities invested in those stations and in the success of that rail station, and it's not going anywhere, right? And so that's a given. Now, how do you maximize that? To get to your point earlier, the bus system is a totally different thing. Are we the right person to do it, or should we do more of it? Right? Should we rethink how we, run that system? Should we be, much more aggressive in bringing in the private sector to do some of those things, whether it's the Uber Lyft model or some other model that's out there? So I think someone that has a very open mind and isn't coming in my perspective, this isn't the board, this is Paul Wiedefeld speaking. Someone that is basically extremely open, that isn't. Running the system, yeah, they got to do that, but that should not be their focus. They have people under them that can do that, run the system, do all that stuff. But, we got to get out of that sort of, the daily hiccup and everyone running to that issue and saying, look, those things will happen. We keep running this thing, but where are we going with this system? Where's the region going with this system is really what I would think the person would bring to the table. We'll see, right? But that would be, my 2 cents on it.
Great, thanks. Fizzy from Montgomery College, you've got a question. See your hand up. Oh,
Tom,
you're on mute. There you go.
Good. Okay. Good morning. I am really, I'd like to ask specifically some of your opinions on how to best integrate some of the planned future development with existing infrastructure of where the stations are located to where, in our case, where students or people who need to get to campuses might not have as easy access to get to them. within Montgomery County specifically, there's a lot of planned development in the biotech areas. There's a lot of expansion, but yet they are not located physically near where any of the metro stations are. So with some of the planned expansion of BRT or other bus, projects that are going, that may get people closer to either the life sciences developments or in our case, the campuses, could you please give us your opinion about how to best integrate that planned use?
Yeah, I think it's going to be much larger than Metro because at the end of the day, for us to run buses, the type of buses we have and all that, it just, doesn't make the most sense, right? Is there another way to do that, a more efficient way to do that? So I think that's going to take involvement of us with like colleges and these different centers to say, look, let's rethink this a little bit and not just say, okay, well, let's run a bus there, and think that solves it. I think it's larger than that. And I think as the travel behavior changes, that could be all different types of hours, all different types of different mini peaks along the way, right? That, a normal bus routing system doesn't really serve that well. And some of it maybe just be more of a more on-demand type service, transit service, right? Whether that be a smaller vehicle or even a larger vehicle in dependent upon the situation. But I think we just have to be much more flexible in our approach to deal with that part of the land use pattern. But obviously we also want to, promote land use or the development around the investment that we made because of the huge investment that we made. So I think there's, again, that balance that we need to have there. But I would look to something much more non-traditional to serve those communities, because it just may be much more efficient to have someone else do it or some other entity do it, another or private and or public.
I guess, again, not saying with hands, continuing on that thought, the privatization component, to what would be the challenges of doing any form of privatization? Is sort of the nature of your entity, the quasi-jurisdictional nature of being in DC, Maryland, Virginia, the federal government, and then ultimately, can a private, this isn't like taking the hot lanes in Maryland and, how do you do that within your network? And if you, and I recognize this won't be your challenge, but have you given any thought to, is there a model for that where privatization of some or all of the network has actually worked?
Well, let me just start at a high level. As you may recall, a few years ago, I proposed a number of things in that area. We had actually privatized one of our bus divisions, Cinderbed in Virginia. We were pursuing privatizing the operation of the Silver Line Phase 2. And those were proposed, in the context of, as we were going for the dedicated revenue, there was a lot of pressures along these same lines. Like, right, how can we do this differently? Is there some other models? And to be frank, the political will to do some of that, dried up, and that happens, right? And as things shift in the political arena, that occurs. So there has been some examples of it, a lot of challenges with it, labor being one of them. Basically any existing service has to be supported by the current labor agreements we have. That's just a reality that we live under, unless there's some major, federal law changes, I would assume, to address that. I don't see that going away. New services, and that's why when we proposed that for the Cinderbed and Silver Line Phase 2, is those were new services. And there you do have the option to go in another direction. But again, that takes a lot of political will to do that, to do that. And I don't think it's a panacea per se either. I think it's worth trying to see what it does. Other parts of the country, particularly in the South, in Dallas and in places like that, they have much more of that than we do generally in the Northeast, to be frank. So I think keeping an open mind about it. And again, I think working with labor on some of those issues, I think is a way to do it. Because the reality is they can always unionize, even in those other environments. which we also see. We use TransDev, which is a big private provider of a lot of services. And so they basically they're now represented by the ATU, the same local that represents our people, represent them. So it doesn't mean that goes away, but maybe there's another way to get both needs served, right? Some of the benefits of the private side running these things, not the capital investment falling on us. From our perspective, it generally, when we hire someone, it's usually a 50+ year commitment. They're when they work for us, and then the benefits that they have when they leave us, and that's a reality. Whereas in some of those other entities, they don't have that. They don't have that tail at the other end as much. And obviously, that's a big social issue. They have 401s and things of that sort. But we have a defined contribution pension plan, and we're one of the few entities that even have that thing anymore, right? That even have such a model. So I think that's where we've got to, think through, is that sustainable, with the issues that we're facing. And again, that's going to take someone with some strong skills in having people step back and rethink these things for the overall good and not the immediate issue that's in front of us, which is very, as you know, very hard to do for people.
Right. So seeing where we're at right now and your forecast for, a much more protracted recovery back into ridership onto rail. And I think you mentioned as part of your discussion that rail was a very expensive or a more expensive component relative to bus. So one doesn't have to, again, I'm just forecasting here, if you're not getting your rail ridership up and rail is expensive, there's going to start to become a greater cash crunch, at least in the near, maybe not in this little moment now, but sometime in here, where there is going to be how does the organization continue to operate, and what does that take from the federal, from the local, the regional, and what's that capital crunch crisis possibly going to lead to from a discussion about, we just talked about the privatization, a lead towards a change in the fundamental way we think of the service. I don't want to think of this as more of an Amtrak, like it constantly requires a public subsidy in order to survive. And by the way, it's not just us, right? Because every other system nationally may be facing the similar situation. So where does this lead us? And what do we have to be prepared for? What do we as, business leaders for the county ultimately have to prepare for, not just for our county, but for our state, but for our region, for the health of this country? Public transit is hugely important to the survivability of a lot of people that carry a lot of weight and shoulder a lot of burden. So where does this go? Because I see a snowball here that is not pretty. And in our current health, financial, everything seems rosy and great with the stock market, a bunch of other stuff, but bubbling on the surface here, there's a lot of stuff that's coming to bear here in the not too distant future. So I've, prophesized a little bit, but I'd love to hear your opinion on this. So.
Yeah, but Bob, I think, I really think you hit on it, which is, I think the business community, and particularly in our region, and probably in the Chicagos and Philadelphias of the world, need to step back with the community and say, look, what is the value of this service? And what value do we put on it? Meaning, from a congestion relief side, from an equity side, from an environmental side, as was brought up earlier. Those are things that, as a community, we have to decide how much value do we put on that, right? And now, so how much do we think that that's got to come from, the person, that's getting on the vehicle versus all the other people that receive a benefit from this, right? Around some of those issues. Again, whether it's equity, congestion, other things that, what is that value? And then where does that lead us, right? And then you then apply that to it. Now let's look at, and so this is, to be frank, you mentioned national. I mean, this is a national discussion at the same time, because again, we're not unique in this area to these issues. So, whether the federal government ever plays a role in this or not, I don't know. But I mean, decades ago, they took money away. They don't give us any operating money. Now we've had this under the pandemic, but that disappears in, roughly, 18 months. So that's just a reality that, as a nation, we may have to wrestle with, or it's going to be the locals to wrestle with it and say, okay, well, our value is up here, it's here, wherever it is. And that's what we're willing to support. And that may mean that we're going to rethink the types of services we provide. But it also, again, I would be a half full person. It may mean that, no, we want to actually do more, right? We may want to think of this differently, which is, no, people want to move in this other pattern, and that's a good thing. Now let's get services that meet that, and we're willing to pay for them. And yes, we'll charge if that's, sort of the, it's almost like a philosophical thing. Should we have the individual user, and what portion of it should they charge, or should they be responsible for, versus the community at large? And I think in our case, when you think of on the rail side, particularly, this huge capital investment that basically, unless we're going to abandon it, the reality is you have to keep investing in it. It's just the nature of, like any of us with a business, you can't walk away from, unless you're willing to walk away from the business. So I don't think that's realistic. I think it means too much to this region, and particularly anyone that's on the joint development side that's here, or in the land use development side. I mean, it is their future. It's how they built it. It's how they built their businesses. It's how the economy in this region is, oriented. There's changes within that, but we're not going to walk away from, the development patterns that we've set. Now we got to figure out, all right, how does this now work within that? So I think that's where a lot of the focus has got to be. And I think the agency can play a very strong role in, again, articulating these issues, bringing these issues. But at the end of the day, they can't just go in a room and just go say, well, this is the way we're going to go. We've got to get, a much larger discussion of this. And then eventually it will require action, from elected officials. And again, that's why I mentioned on the dedicated, it took 3 years to get to that point where we could get to that action point with a very understandable, straightforward, case to be made. This is much more complex. This is a matrix type of thinking here that is going to take a lot of people involved, and we're going to need some dedicated people, passionate people about some of these topics. But we have that. I mean, we have the commitment within the region, for obviously the future of the region and the value of this system and what it means to the region. So we've got to build on that, understanding some of these other issues that we may never have a clear, projection of what this looks like. But they're real issues that we can't ignore. We can't pretend it's 2010. It's just not. That's just not where we are. And every business is, as I'm sure you're going through. Everyone that I speak to is going through the same thing at different levels. This is just a complex one, given the nature of the service that it provides in this region.
Yeah, diving into a little bit more on the tri-state, or the DC, Maryland, Virginia situation, and DC again. I think one of the good and the bad that we're going to face here with WMATA is, DC can't support itself. It's supported by the federal government to a certain extent. It is the center. I mean, it's every station goes into the district and out of the district, right? I mean, it's kind of a hub to everything, and then everything radiates off of it. Without the district and without the funding, the system collapses, because Maryland and Virginia aren't going to do their share if the district can't be funded. The district can't be funded unless the federal government decides to fund it. Federal government can't decide to fund it. What happens with New York? What happens? So every other region, unless there's something else. Obviously, New York's got a little bit of the tri-state thing going on, but everybody else can be solved at the state level. We can't. We fundamentally, this isn't Dallas where it's 3 hours to the border, or California where we have to be solved on a regional and handling on a federal level. And then what happens with our government that doesn't function properly when the district needs to be bailed out and everybody else says, what about my system? And what about my system? I guess what does this foretell for you? You mentioned that your successor's got to have leadership within the labor component. What about into the political realm that's going to happen here? Because I just don't know what happens. I mean, it's a mess. And,
Well, Bob, welcome to my world.
I know.
No,
it's not an easy one. I think we all recognize that. Everyone in this
I come at it from the other perspective, which is, what a fantastic opportunity. I mean, these are tremendous challenges, but ones that drive people like you and me to think about these and then try to get to, something that's we can all move forward with. So I think that's the way to do it. It's not a throw up your hands moment. And that's what I'm trying to get across. And to be frank, even with the announcement of my retirement, it's like, no, this is the opportunity to launch in another direction. When I came in, we were in a stage where, look, we had to get this patient, off the table. And I believe we've done that. But now it's like, all right, now where does this patient want to go? Right? They're leaving the hospital. Where are they going? And so that's sort of where in my mind, where this is the next level of this. And I think it's positive. I think, but we have to understand, the pressures that are on us. But by no means do I think that's then a pessimistic future. I just think it's a new future. And so, that's how I think that and again, I don't think I think the new general manager can play a big role in this, from our perspective. But I'm sure the convention business, the hotel business, the restaurant businesses, particularly in the core of DC, as you just mentioned, they've got to be rethinking their business models. And some are probably very aggressive, positive, and others are thinking pessimistically about it. But the strength of this region is, in my mind, is the combination of all the above, right? I mean, when you think about the nation's capital, when you think of the arts and the sciences and all the things that we have in this region, those aren't going away, right? I mean, those are still, it's the fabric of where we are, and the colleges and different things that we have. So we just keep building off those. We just build off of them in a different manner. I mean, the district isn't going to shutter, right? There's going to be a lot of activity there. And people also, I have a tremendous faith that, in society, a lot of people want to be in that type of environment. I mean, we see it in the history of man, right? I mean, they come together, they want to interact, and that's what they want to do. That's part of why they choose to live in a Washington region or a parish. That's why you do that. Not everyone wants to live in North Dakota, right? I mean, there's other reasons people do what they do. So I think that's positive, and we got to keep building around that. But I think we also have to look in the mirror a little bit and say, okay, where are we going with this thing?
Can I just comment on this last point that Paul and Bob have discussed as we move towards closing this conversation out? We're approaching 10 o'clock. And that is, I've been involved with these regional discussions for decades. And Bob raises a key point, and Paul has addressed it well. What I have learned about the DC region, and I got thrown into this stuff starting in the 1970s. So I can't believe in a couple of years, it'll be 50 years that I've been dealing with these issues, as my daughters have taught me to use that term. Issues and opportunities, not problems. This is why we have daughters. And that is this. The only place where we have a regional leader in the Washington region has been, in my book, whoever holds the position of executive director of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. However, that being said, I have never worked with an executive director of WashCog who took that role on. It's a difficult role to be the executive director of COG, but still, every executive director I have worked with just declines to take that leap and become this region's leader on the very issues we all are talking about. De facto, the regional leader of the DC region, in my book, has been for decades the general manager of WMATA. When the secretaries of transportation get together annually in a public meeting to discuss the very issues we're talking about, and they have the DDOT director, the secretary of transportation for the state of Maryland and for the Commonwealth of Virginia, always the fourth chair, and there's a fourth chair, is always occupied, and correctly, by the general manager of WMATA, of Metro. So I'm glad Bob raised the point at the end of this meeting, because WMATA's board of directors is going to choose the successor to Paul. Paul has been the de facto leader of this region. He would never say that, never. He would not even imply it, but it's been the reality. You know, he's the guy who ties the region together on so many issues dealing with not just transportation, but economic development, societal problems, on and on and on. All of that is to say, as we're closing out this meeting, that Paul has done an admirable job the last 6 years. He took on a train wreck and has, you know, well, I'm mixing my metaphors, that's terrible, but he has righted the ship. I've moved from a train wreck to a ship, but it's all transportation related, Paul. But you know, we were headed for an iceberg 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. We really were in terms of Metro. I mean, it was aiming towards an iceberg, and Paul stopped it. And he was able to work with elected officials in all 3 jurisdictions, and they have respected him and listened to him. So I'm just saying all of that to say that to the people on this call, it is up to the people on this call and the people we speak with to make sure that the board of directors of WMATA pick a worthy successor to Paul. Because if the person is as good as Paul Wiedefeld has been, that person becomes the de facto leader of the region. It's our version of Robert Moses, to be candid. What Robert Moses did in the New York City region when he held the power that he held was because he was the one regional leader who could get things done working with all the elected people. And that's where we are today. And this year, the board of directors is going to pick the successor. So I just want to say that I want to thank Paul on behalf of everyone on this call for his leadership in this region over the past 6.5 years, and what he's going to be doing over the next 6 months in transition is so important. And what we need to do, not just because of Montgomery County, but for the region, is make sure the board of directors picks the right person. By the way, folks, Paul was not the board of directors' choice 6.5 years ago. They were going in the wrong direction. Believe it or not, Paul was, right, Paul? Paul was basically, effectively, the 5th choice. And
Hey, I made the top 10. I'm happy.
Paul was the 5th choice, and they ended up, though, with the best choice. It just took a while for the board of directors to realize that the first 4 choices were not good choices. And then they turned to the guy standing there who was the obvious choice from day one and said, oh, Paul Wiedefeld. I'm not saying that we want to go through that experience again. It's too much heartburn, but the board of directors needs to hear from all of us on who the next person's going to be. So that's my commentary at the end of this meeting. I just want to say thank you to Paul and everyone who's attended this conversation. I'm going to let Gigi or Bob close out, or Brian. Just a note, at our next meeting on March the 8th, we are having Carol Rubin, the newest member of the Montgomery County Planning Board. She will be joining us in a conversation. I'm going to turn this over to whoever wants the last word. Thank you.
Well, I won't be last, but I'll at least, say thank you to Paul. Thank you for humoring me with my questions and bombarding you with things just to make sure that we touched on anything. I did want to, before we close and give it probably either to Gigi to Brian, is there anything you wanted the opportunity to say and close out on, other than, we're thankful that we had you for the last 6 years. I think I speak for everybody who's still here. It's been a pleasure working with you. We wish you all the best, but is there anything else you'd like to tell us in this last moment, just before we?
I mean, this position, no matter who's in it, cannot be successful without the support of groups like you. I mean, and without your engagement and without your support. So, I mean, no matter who's in here. The only one piece of advice I would have in a new person is to be sure that you have someone that isn't coming here to build a resume. I think this job has to be come at that, you know, you're coming at it and it is what it is, and you're not worried about the next step. You're going to just try to tackle this thing, and so be it. If you last, you know, a week or 6 years, you just play it that way. And that would be my biggest fear, because if you have someone that comes in a mindset that they're more worried about, you know, their personal gains or whatever, I don't think that's going to get us very far, to be frank. I think you've got to take this thing, and I'm sure if you look at some of the decisions I made, they probably weren't the best political decisions, you know, but there were decisions that I felt had to be made, and I was willing to, you know, just do them and then, you know, let the chips fall where they may. But I always felt it was the best for the region and for the agency. So I'm hoping that, again, from my perspective, I think that's the best way to handle a job like this. Otherwise, you know, you can start making decisions in all kinds of directions that just aren't helpful. So that would be the only piece of advice I would give to you. But again, thank you, because if you don't stay engaged, either others will or no one will, right? And so that's important. But I also, I'm hoping this was a good conversation. I mean, I think it's a complex one. I think it's one that really needs to be elevated. And I would suggest that you keep pushing along these lines in whatever, you know, quarters you have, because these are tough issues, but you can't ignore them. We got to tackle them.
Great. Well, again, thank you very much. Gigi, you want to close out?
I just wanted to say thank you, Paul, for your amazing leadership over all these years. And you know, it's been a joy to work with you. I think your parting remarks on leadership are right on target, that our best leaders will follow your model of making the tough decisions, and not be thinking about, well, where does this get me personally, to do the right thing. It's always right to do the right thing, and I think you've embodied that model and those values. So it's a joy. I look forward to continuing our many conversations in whatever it is you do next. I hope that's going to be a possibility. But I just want to say personally, as well as professionally, it has been pure joy and inspiration to work with you. So thank you.
Yeah, and I hope to see you all. I'm sure we'll see each other, you know, next few months. So thank you so much.
Brian, do you have parting remarks to close us out?
I just want to thank Paul. I also want to thank Charlie for being a pleasure to work with and working with us and me to get this meeting together. So thank you to WMATA. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Charlie.
Okay, thank you all. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Paul.